Ice axes, what to buy, what to look for, what makes a good walking, introductory mountaineering, adventurous walking ice axe. That's what we're going to cover today. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more, stay tuned. So welcome back. We're going to talk today about ice axes and ice axes in a sort of winter mountain leader context. But that would be equally appropriate for people doing some sort of challenging winter walking. But we're not going to delve into climbing, technical climbing axes. I'm not going to tell you what the best ice axe is because, I don't think there is such a thing as the best ice axe. We're going to go through some of the things that you want to look for when you're looking for an ice axe that works for you. So we're going to talk about the length of the ice axe, the shaft length. We're going to talk about weight of an ice axe and how much it weighs and whether having a heavy axe is a good thing. A little bit about the shape of the shaft and grip rests and trig rests and all those sorts of things. The different shapes of pick and what you might want to look for. And then finally, we'll talk about the strength of the axe, because axes come with different strength ratings. Cool. So to dive in, let's start off with the length. There are all sorts of things out there. I often hear people say you should stand with the ice axe in your arm and it should touch the top of your boot. If you're really tall, then that sort of axe is going to be really long and unwieldy, in my opinion. So for me, that's not a great measurement. It maybe does, sort of 60 to 70% of the population, but there's going to be people either end that might not work for. So for me, really, we think about what the ice axe is going to be used for. So this is a winter walking axe with maybe some, little bits of mountaineering terrain, but not climbing. We're not going to spend time swinging the axe above our head very often. Most of the time, it's going to be in our hand and we're going to carry it in a walking position. Yeah. So with that in mind, I sort of want my axe to be not quite a walking stick, but at least useful as a sort of third point of contact, maybe when I'm on, relatively steep terrain. Not climbing terrain, but relatively sort of steep walking terrain. So on that sort of note, really dependent on your height, anything between 50 or maybe 55 and 65 centimeters. So for me, I'm 6'1". This is a 50 centimeter axe. It doesn't do a whole lot for me when I'm walking. Yeah, it's short and easy to manage, but when I'm walking, I have to sort of stoop on all but the very steepest of terrain to get this to be effective as a third point of contact. So most of my axes are around the sort of 65 centimeter range. I wouldn't go bigger than 65 centimeters because I find that they become a little bit unwieldy if I ever do need to swing it as an axe, but also getting into a good ice axe rest position can be a little bit wieldy because they extend too far down. So think about how tall you are, and probably anything between 55 and 65 centimeters is roughly sort of where you're looking for. Cool. And then sort of weight of axe. So as a winter mountain leader, we're using our axe not just for ourselves in a way of walking, but we're going to be using it to chop little ledges for our clients to stand on at times, cutting steps, slash steps potentially, cutting slots for horizontal axe belays, all sorts of things. And so the weight of the axe comes into that. A heavier axe is going to have more force behind it than a lightweight sort of what we often refer to as a toffee hammer axe. So having a super lightweight axe may seem a great idea because it's less weight for you to carry and on your rucksack. But actually, when you come to use an anger, they're not great. So for me, having something's a little bit, burlier with a little bit of weight to it is going to be a better chopping axe for when I come to use it as a tool rather than just as walking. You'll often find as well that they're just a little bit more solidly made and therefore will stand up to the rigors of heavy use. Because like I say, for most recreational hill walkers, you're probably using your axe just as almost like a walking stick, as a third point of contact 99% of the time. That's very different for a winter mountain leader. You're going to be using it to chop things on a regular basis. So having a sturdier axe is going to be a good idea. So for me, I would avoid a lightweight axe. And then I'm going to think a little bit about the shape of the axe. Yeah, so it's sort of gone out of fashion really to have a straight shafted axe. What is fashionable nowadays is that curve. And there's all sorts of reasons I hear people giving for the curve. One is it's better when you're climbing, but as we've just said, this isn't really a tool for climbing. This is a tool for mountaineering. So that doesn't really sort of help me. One thing it can be useful for is if you're in steeper terrain and you're choking the axe, then it can keep your knuckles and your hand away from the snow. But where the bend tends to occur, tends to be away from the pick, I prefer to have, if I'm choking an axe, so daggering and then choking. If I'm choking the axe, I want my hand right up next to the pick, because that's where I get my force in. Here, it just doesn't feel very wieldy. So whilst it's fashionable, and the vast majority of my axes all have a bend in now, not through choice, through that's what's on the market, I don't really see a huge benefit to that as a winter mountain leader. In fact, I saw a bit of a drawback, because when I'm digging my horizontal axes for my belays, it's much easier to get this to sit comfortably in that slot and get as much snow contact as possible with a straight axe than it is with an axe with a curve, because this bit here is inevitably maybe going to be a bit away from the snow. I'm trying to get it bedded in as well as possible, to make it as strong as possible. So for me, if I had the choice, and I found an axe that had the other requirements that I want, then I'd be definitely going for a straight shafted axe in a winter ML context. Other things to think about that seem to have become more common and popular is sort of trig rests and grip rests. So this axe here has one of these. This is a Petzl Sumtex, has one of these slidey trig rests, yeah, which is great in a climbing context. Yeah, it gives me my hand something to grip onto. But like we said, we're not really using our ice axe in that context as a winter mountain leader. So yeah, I mean, I could easily take this one off. It's just a little bolt there, Allen key. But some of them come now, certainly I've seen a couple of the Simond ones. They have on the bottom of the axe, or built in, they have a little metal sort of almost lump that does the same job, and that's not removable. It's not a huge issue. They're a bit uncomfortable when you're trying to hold it sort of the other way around to cut steps, because they dig into your hand. But more importantly, they make it harder for your axe to be plunged. And I might want to plunge my axe for a stomper belay, or just a self belay, So I want to be able to get that shaft into the snow. And if there's something that sticks out of it and is going to basically create friction in the snow, that's going to stop me from plunging my shaft, be it for a stomper or a self belay. So for me, the grip rests and the trig rests and things like that aren't really appropriate, and not needed at winter ML level. Cool, so that sort of shaft shape. Picks. So thinking about the shape of your pick. Now, keep on saying it, but we're not doing a whole load of swinging of the ice axe. We're not going ice climbing. So the pick ultimately might be used a little bit for a little bit of simple, swinging into it, to up little rocky steps, or maybe, over a little steepening to get up onto a plateau, sort of slightly corniced area, or just a sort of steeper bank of snow. But it's not full on climbing. So I can certainly live with a normal walking shaped pick. When my pick becomes really pretty important is if I ever have to get into that ice axe rest position. And this pick, this gentle curve that most of these axes have on them, is going to be far more forgiving for applying in an ice axe rest position. Whereas a sort of a slightly more aggressive dropped pick, far more climbing appropriate, is going to be less forgiving in firmer snow, the sort of snow you might slide on for an ice axe rest. So yeah, isn't going to be as helpful. So for me, I'm looking for a pretty gentle classic sort of walking pick, really. Yeah, not a dropped climbing-esque pick. So those are the main sort of things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the length. I'm thinking about, is there a bit of weight to my axe? Is it a bit burly? Is it going to be a good digging axe? Has it got the right sort of shape for me to plunge into the snow, to create, if needed, horizontal axe belays? Yeah, and has it got the right sort of gentle angled pick shape? So those are the main things that go through my mind. But I just want to chat now a little bit about ice axe strength. So we see a lot of questions online, and we get a lot of people asking us on courses and things, how strong does my ice axe need to be? Now, all ice axes are tested under the UIAA. So they have a set of sort of criteria that they have to meet. And you can get what we used to have as B and T, so basic, which was a slightly weaker, and T for technical, which was a slightly stronger axe. That's changed recently to type 1 and 2. So type 1 is a basic, type 2 is technical. So 1 slightly weaker, 2 slightly stronger. And I see a lot of people saying, oh, you must have a technical axe. Yeah, so as an example, this one here, this Petzl Sumtech is a T-rated axe, or the shaft is T-rated. Yeah, so, but the pick is a B-rated. Yeah, so this shaft is what they would say technical, so it's stronger, and the pick is still a B-rated pick, so not quite as strong. And you'll often find, not really winter ML relevant, but ice axes for ice climbing, the picks are often B-rated because they're thinner for climbing ice. In terms of the winter ML, and a walking axe and a general mountaineering axe, we don't need to worry too much. Our axe, as we said, isn't going to be used for loads of climbing. We're not doing lots of funky climbing moves and torquing our pick off it and hanging off it and things like that. When our axe is probably going to be put under the most stress is either all it's digging, yeah, or when we put it into a horizontal axe belay, attach a sling around it, and then load it onto our bucket seat, etc. And if you go onto the UIA website, you can look at the various tests. They have a nice little PDF. I'll put a link to it in the description below this. But they have a little PDF that shows you. And actually, the axe loading, where it's got attachment point around it, as if it was in a bucket, a horizontal axe and then loaded, is the same for a T and a B rated shaft. So in a winter ML context, it doesn't matter whether your shaft is B rated or T rated. So, I suppose if I had a choice and all the other things, it was the right length, the right weight, the right shape, and all the pick was all okay, and and then it was like, oh, I could get this one that's a T-rated shaft and this one that's a B-rated shaft. I'd probably lump for the T-rated, yeah, the slightly stronger shaft. But I certainly wouldn't let the strength of the shaft override the other things within my my criteria. Yeah, so for example, this is a great little axe, but it's too short for me. This has got a T-rated shaft. Yeah. This axe for me is a better winter ML and mountaineering axe. It's slightly longer, and it's got a B-rated shaft. So I pick this over this one, even though the shaft is slightly weaker. Yeah. So that's the sort of main things I'm looking for as a sort of a winter mountain leader, sort of adventurous walking ice axe. I suppose last, little few things to sort of say, around the axe is, and these are real luxuries, but think about, what's on the end of it. Most axes come you know, with it's not particularly sharp, which is a good thing because it could do some real damage to sort of our kit and our legs and things. But something that you can at least sort of get into the snow compared to something like this, which is just a little bit blunt. So thinking about that. So, and then finally, you know, this is, I don't think they make them anymore, but this was one of my favorite axes because it's slightly rubberized. And when I spend a lot of time carrying my axe, you know, away from the head, it's just slightly warmer. It just keeps your hands on really cold days. It keeps your hands slightly warmer, and it's less slidey. So for me, I'm not sure why they stopped making them, but for me, this was a great axe when they decided to make them. And then final little luxury thing is, like I said, you're going to spend a lot of time carrying your axe, you know, by the head of it. And Black Diamond do this really well. They have these little grooves in here, which makes it super comfy for carrying. When you're sort of carrying it like that, the hands just sort of slot in. Whereas some other axes, you know, they're not quite as comfy. This one has quite a bulge here. Admittedly, it's mainly a climbing axe. There's a bit of a bulge there. And so I tend to find that that bulge pushes into the top of my hand a lot. Certainly when I want to plunge it into the snow, that bulge really pushes into the palm of my axe. Oh, sorry, a palm of my hand. Most axes nowadays come with a fairly standard adze. Yeah, so we talked about weight when we come to picking an axe. It's not a game changer for me, but I quite like a big adze. You know, the bigger the adze, the more snow I can move. But in reality, most of these adzes nowadays, they're pretty standard on a walking / mountaineering axe. Some climbing axes, you know, technical axes, have very small adzes. They're not great, but they're not designed as a chopping tool and things like that. So again, real luxury if I had a choice, but it would be the last thing I think about is, you know, can I get a big adze on that? So yeah, so Winter ML, adventurous walking ice axes. Length, weight, shaft shape and grip rests, pick shape, strength, and then our luxuries of our spike on the bottom and adze shape. Cool. Hopefully that's been useful. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you out and about in the mountains in winter using your ice axe. Thanks very much for watching.